Now, Ben Fordham comments.
Well, it's getting harder and harder and harder to get a fair go. Just ask anyone who's on the social housing wait list. Shocking new figures have exposed how families from overseas are taking up more than 35,000 social housing tenancies across the state of New South Wales. 35,000. That means 23% of all social housing tenancies are lived in by foreign-born residents, and a further 17% of social housing is taken up by families of unknown origin. All this comes straight from the data from the New South Wales Communities and Justice Department, and the consequences for Aussies on the social housing wait list is just catastrophic. The figures show that a median wait time for social housing is over 5 years. The average wait time for families applying for social housing is now almost 2 years. And for those living in northern New South Wales, it's even worse. The wait time, 5.5 years. The wait list for social housing now has 57,000 people on the list, and the queue just keeps it getting longer and longer. Now, this is not an attack on migrants. You can't blame them for wanting to come to Australia, and when they do, they need somewhere to live. But these figures revealed in the Daily Telegraph highlight the issues we have with immigration. We don't have enough homes for Aussies, but we keep on bringing in hundreds of thousands of migrants, and many of them don't have the financial means to afford a home. And you can't blame them. Most young people living and working in Sydney who've been here their whole life can't afford a home in the harbour city. There are nearly 60,000 people on the waiting list for social housing. 35,000 people are homeless. And we're still welcoming 500,000 people a year from overseas. It's a bit like lining up for a hot dog at the footy and you got 100 people in the queue, and then a helicopter lands in the middle of the stadium and drops off another 20 people who are all hungry. They all need to be squeezed into the line, and someone has got to miss out. Jordan Knight from Migrant Watch Australia has jumped on these latest housing numbers. He says if nearly a quarter of social housing stock is being used by people who are foreign born, we need to know more about them. Are they recently arrived migrants? Are they here on temporary visas? Under what circumstances have they arrived? Do they have the financial ability to afford their own housing? And he says we need to know if recently arrived migrants are being placed in the front of the queue before the locals. And that's a good question, because when people arrive from overseas, it's likely they'll need more help than someone who's already here. So who gets their foot in the front door when a house becomes available? Again, let me repeat, don't blame the person coming from overseas, blame the system. We're bringing in too many people to Australia, and we're bringing in too many people who can't afford to live here. That's why they're given a home while others are left waiting. And I must say, I was shocked by those numbers. 23% of all social housing tenancies in New South Wales lived in by foreign-born residents. Now, mind you, there are a lot of Aussies who originally came from overseas. But 35,000 social housing tenancies involve families from overseas. And again, we don't have the detail that Jordan has asked the question on, Jordan Knight from Migrant Watch Australia, because they could be people who've been here for 20 years or 10 years or 5 years, or they could be people who turned up last week and they get bumped up the queue because, understandably, they don't have the financial means to afford a house. Few people do these days in Sydney.